any comments, questions, clarifications, anything you're curious about. So don't be shy about interrupting me. You can type into the chat, or you can raise your hand, or even just speak up directly. So yes, thank you everyone for sharing what your background is and your skill set is. So we have a better sense of where everyone's coming from and what we can focus on in this 1 hour. Okay, so let's continue. And stop me at any point if you need clarifications or have questions. My background is I'm an adjunct lecturer here at Harvard. I was a race and technology fellow at Stanford a few years back. I'm doing actually my PhD concurrently. So at the same time I'm teaching, I'm studying for my PhD at Northeastern University, which is also in Boston. I was a Nieman Fellow, which is a program for journalists, a fellowship program for journalists in 2013 here at Harvard as well. I did my master's at Berkeley School of Information, and I think it was a good idea to study information because now we live in a world that's so full of information. There's such an abundance of information. There's such a scarcity of attention and time. And that's something I think in public policy we have to be cognizant of, that there's overwhelming amount of data and information, and how do we get people's attention with storytelling and visualizations and different ways to present the data. Okay. My claim to fame is I was one of the founding engineers at YouTube, and I uh, built many of the features. But one of the ones I'm particularly fond of is I advocated for the skippable ads. So if you get to click the skip button and don't have to sit to 15 or 30 seconds, I was part of the group of engineers and designers who advocated for that. So, okay. Let's go straight into why do we visualize data in a public policy situation? Um, as you know, in the rubric for this hackathon, there's a lot of mentions of how do we measure that this proposal or um, you know, this policy recommendation is on track or not on track. So being able to track the performance, having the situation awareness, creating some benchmarks and setting some targets and goals, all this data and evidence ensures there's some transparency as well as some accountability. So as we go through this workshop, we'll keep that in the back of our minds. We're making some projections. We're hoping for the best case scenario, but there's always some unexpected variations and hurdles and risks. And how do you manage this risk and reduce the uncertainty? So visualization can guide us through this process to give us the ability to forecast different scenarios, to present them and communicate them. And ultimately, this last final bullet point is something we in the academic community as researchers we try to do quite often. Even when I was in industry working at Google and YouTube, we often try to do a lot of experimentation and A/B testing and different ways to ascertain the causes and effects. So what kind of interventions, what kind of uh, you know things we can control creates what kind of outcomes and impact. So that's something you'll have to grapple with. What can you build a model that can clearly explain and also very accurately predict and forecast the causes and effects? What are some of the most instrumental variables that leads to this outcome? And how do we disentangle so many different variables that might lead to a specific outcome? So when it comes to public policy, data visualizations can guide us through all these tracking and monitoring, but also as well as modeling and being able to have a better understanding of what factors lead to some outcome and to see if we're on track or not. Okay, so when it comes to data, there's just, as I said, we're flooded with data. There's like so much data coming at us, and we're collecting so much data. How do we structure it just like these pieces of Legos into different colors, different sizes, different shapes, and could make that informative into structured information? And there's a whole field in computer science and information science now in data science with AI that helps us structure the information. But I want us to move a step beyond that, especially for policy recommendations. We have to turn them into stories. We have to make some meaning out of even the structure information. So when children play with the Legos, they build characters and they buy the story. They don't buy the free build pieces. That's something we as um, data scientists working in public policy need to keep in the back of our mind. We have to always be creating and producing narratives and stories. So let's continue. Feel free to again ask me any questions, type into the chat or raise your hand. And I'm going to play a storytelling video. This is one of the most famous experts in data visualization storytelling, Hans Rosling. So I highly recommend his work. But let's watch a little bit together how he tells this story. Okay. So let's just experience data storytelling in this video.
And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We start the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here, they still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there, but now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
Okay. So let's reflect on this as maybe a case study and spend a few minutes on how Hans Rosling so effectively portrays the statistics. So maybe we can use chat or you can speak up in a discussion, but you're welcome to type into the chat. My first prompt or my first question is, what about this data set makes it a natural story? What element, which variable makes it easy way, a easy good fit to make it into a narrative? So that's the first question. What do you think is making this data set easy? Okay, family size, good. I see that. Mona Lisa, Lisha. Anyone else? Any other variables that makes it a natural story? Think animation. How is he able to animate it? Which variable is he moving? And what do stories have typically? Time, yes. Time is exactly what I was thinking in my mind. Because stories have a beginning, middle and an end, and we all anticipate. He even kind of asks you, what do you think these countries will move? Will they go to the left? Will they go up? Or will they just go to the top left corner? He's already trying to give you a different set of scenarios to pique your curiosity. So this curiosity gap leads to this storytelling element. So change over time. So the 2 axes, as you mentioned in the chat, are fertility rate and life expectancy. So horizontal x-axis, fertility rate. Life expectancy, that's the y-axis. And you know, when it comes to these two variables, I could have presented like a data scientist, not to stereotype or generalize, but a data scientist might say, oh, this is a chart. It shows fertility rate, it shows life expectancy, and in the last few decades, it has moved up. But the way Hans Rosling is able to kind of perform this this narrative, this picture in this design, it comes together really well. It gets the audience very excited. Everyone's very engaged, and so adding that type of kind of surprise or curiosity gap leads to engagement and attention. You want to get people's attention. You can't just say these are the dry statistics and this is, the top three countries. That's not gonna get anyone, compel anyone to do anything about what you just told them. So this is, in a way, stories are more entertaining. It leads to more questions, more conversations, and possibly it helps, uh, you know, it helps drive people to engage with your work, with your recommendations. Okay. And one last bit is when he was setting up the context, he already said that there's this general accepted notion or these expectations people have about these different set of countries or regions. And there's an element of surprise. And in data analysis, when you think about what is an insight, what is an actionable insight, what is meaningful, there's always an element of surprise as a result of the data analysis. So if your team has a data analyst and a subject matter expert, or you're the same person, you use the statistical analysis uh, to get some insights, but you have to present the insight in and communicate it in this contextual narrative, in this storytelling. So this is the kind of epitome, the highest level of storytelling with data. Let's continue. Okay. Some tips that I tell my students is that you definitely don't just want to visualize the data. You want to visualize the meaning and implications for policymakers. First, you always have to set up the context before showing the statistics. So don't get ahead of yourself and show the data and the charts immediately. Set up the background story. Explain the situation, the circumstances, or where the data is being used. Make sure the audience feels the data. That's another point about this video. It's the people in the data. It's the subjects that Hans Rosling is portraying. And when he calls out all these different country names and regions, he resonates with people. So the chart informs, but the story will inspire people to believe and act. And that's something when you present at the hackathon, hopefully in person at Harvard, at the Kennedy School in a few weeks, you want to inspire people. Okay. And lastly, before you start using software, my tip is the software constrains your creativity. It actually boxes in your storytelling capability. So you want to start sketching the narrative, creating like an outline of what you want to say. Like Hans Rosling probably wrote a script before he just designed the visualization. So you have to do this kind of like a movie writer, write a script and like a storyboard before you go into the charts and create the charts, because you get too caught up in the software if you go directly into designing charts. Okay, so those are some of the best practices I recommend. So let's now move on to the next question. Generally, we have the data scientists, then we have the software tools, and then we have the subject matter experts, and you also need some design skills. So not everyone is a trained designer, but I would promise you each one of us has a design aesthetic sensibility. So you are all innate talented designers, and that's going to design principles. With data visualization, where uh, the goal of data visualization is to aid our understanding of data by leveraging the human visual system's highly attuned ability to see patterns, spot trends, and identify outliers. So those are the general three um, takeaways with visualizations. The audience can see the patterns immediately, as opposed to writing text or showing like a tape data table in Excel or a spreadsheet. You can spot the trends and call out the different relationships and identify outliers. So I'll give you a few kind of before we do the design, I'll give you a few caveats or a few things to keep in mind about data. You always have to be critical and say, where does the data come from? Where who certifies the data? So you have to be, responsible and use data responsibly and make sure it's reliable and verified. And what criteria is used for certifying the data? So those are really important base level foundational steps. And of course, we know subjectivity always gets into each step of the process upstream before you visualize the data. So you have to question yourself as well and what is the lineage or provenance of the source of the data. And every step along the way, especially when you visualize the data, you may be creating and adding subjectivity. So that's something to be aware. You can't avoid it, but to be very transparent about. And lastly, when I do my research, we realize that some certain populations, certain groups and subgroups, there's a challenge in collecting data. So they are either understudied or underrepresented. So I like to share this with you. This is a quote about data in itself. Not everything we count counts. On the other hand, not everything that counts can be counted. So there's limitations in terms of resource and just quantifying things. Anytime you quantify, you reducing the complexity of a phenomenon. So keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay, so the steps in terms of the data visualization process is we have to acquire the data and ingest the data, import the data. We have to do some exploratory data analysis, and I'll go a little bit into that, although the focus of this workshop mainly is the data visualization. How do we present the data? How do we design the interactions for the data? Okay, there's a five-step process. You first define the question. I like to keep it simple and say, what is the question you're asking of the data? Then you do the data analysis and transformations and changes and reshape the data and filter the data. Now, the third stage is to create the different chart types and then to design the storytelling. You prototype and create many different versions. Your first version or design might not be the best one. So you create different prototypes and rapidly iterate. And then you test it and get feedback for it. And if the testing doesn't go well, you go back a few steps. Maybe you redefine the question and go back to step one. Okay, so going back to design principles, how do we spot the different patterns in the data? This is a very simple scatter plot. I will ask you to type into the chat again, so get your keyboards ready. What I I purposely cover up the relationship. What is the relationship in this first scatter plot on the left, the very first one? So if you can type in and make your best guess, what is the relationship between the x variable and the y variable? And typically in statistics, there's the x variable is what the intervention, and the y variable is the outcome. So the x variable you can control. Uh, you can control the outcome of the y variable by changing and tuning the x variable. So yes, they're directly proportional. They're positively correlated. It's an upward trend, I believe. So we have an upward trend. And then the next one, I don't even need to type it. It's a downward trend. Let's go to the third one. If you can type in, what do you think is the pattern or relationship? Yeah, clusters. That's great. So exactly, clusters is correct. And the last one's a little harder, maybe. Does anyone want to venture and type in a guess for what's the last one? What's the pattern you visually detect immediately because it's been visualized in a scatter plot? What's the last pattern? Abnormality. That's exactly right. You got two right, or maybe three and four. That's another word for abnormality. What's another statistical term for this dot right here is I'm sure you know, outlier. Perfect. Okay, that's the right one answer. So great job. You guys got all of these different patterns because your eyes cannot help it. You can't even unthink or not detect the relationship. Once we point it out, you naturally will see these. Okay, so for any chart, there's the title, there's the axes, the labels. If you have a forecast, you want to be transparent and portray the dotted lines. Label as much as possible. You should annotate, like annotate to make your point even more clear. And typically, when I advocate for titles, that encapsulates the insight. The title should capture the insight immediately. Don't just use the title fertility rate versus life expectancy. Let's say, uh, the fertility rate has been declining over the last few decades, by 50%. That's the insight. Capture the insight directly on the title itself. Okay. Um, Charts can be misleading and can manipulate. So I'm going to show you a case study. This is all the same data sets, the underlying data. So this is the degree in Celsius, the average temperature. It seems like it's not changing very much. So if you're advocating there's no climate change, this would be your design. If you're advocating for there is a lot of climate change. You just compress the axes and you cut off the axes from not, you don't start at zero, you start at 13.4. Sometimes it's not justified, but if you're transparent, explain it, present the context beforehand, before you show the visual. This is showing the change in temperature. Finally, if you do a calculation, you can show the percentage change in temperature. And again, the axes will give you if you start at -2% or -1% and 2%, or you start 10% and 10%. You can tell a very different story. So you can really quote unquote lie with charts. It's not necessarily lying, you're just presenting different interpretations of the data. You have to explain it very clearly, very responsibly. But one of the if you're the subject matter expert and I tell you if the ocean's temperature, water temperature increases by 1 degree Celsius, a lot of ice will melt. That's important to realize that a bigger range of axes is not a good idea. If you say you have a fever and your temperature goes from, by let's say 0.5 or even 0.2 degrees Celsius, your body temperature goes up, you're in big trouble. So then those axes should be much more compressed. So it's all in the context of how you set up the story. Okay, so the axes matter a lot when you present the data. And even on the cell phone, when you rotate it horizontal, it looks like there's no change. Rotate it vertical, looks like there's a lot of change. So be uh, cognizant, be aware of how the data is presented and how you uh, uh, introduce the data. Okay. There's different chart types. We'll go a little bit into dashboards, which are more interactive and exploratory, but typically charts are explanatory. You can use infographics, you can use interactive charts, you can put static charts into reports. So whether they're interactive or static, or whether they're explanatory or exploratory. Okay. So I'm going to ask you another question. So get ready to type into the chat. This is a chart depicting an e-commerce website. The e-commerce website had quite a survey, and the survey says is asking question: How do you like the price in the website? How do you like the selection, the design of the website, the delivery of the products, and the product quality? And this is what the survey results data came back, and we're showing the satisfaction out of 100%. My question to you and challenge to you is, how do we improve and enhance the design of this bar chart to make it immediately meaningful? Just in less than half a second, the audience will be able to find meaning. Because right now you're kind of struggling. You're saying delivery is good, but website
போய்
design
பெட்ரோல்
is not so
அடிப்பேன்டா
good.
எவனா
So,
வரட்டும்டா அப்படியே
mhm.
போயிடும்
So I see you're typing to the chat. Add colors, that's great. Arrange in order, so sorting it, arrange in descending or ascending order. Yes. Those are all really good ideas. Um, Is it missing any elements? Going back to the elements of a chart. Okay. Is it missing anything? Any other elements in this chart? Yeah. Add the data points, right? Good. Any other thing that's missing? I just talked about that you want to encapsulate the key message somewhere um, in this chart that's missing. And also, just from a design perspective, yeah, the main idea. And where would you put the main idea or the conclusion? Yes, in the title. Perfect. That's exactly. The title is such a underutilized pixels, number of spaces in the chart. What else could we do? I will also challenge you. Well, I'll show you the answer, which most of you, the combination of all your suggestions, the colors, the sorting. Right now, it still doesn't have the title. It really makes it much easier to detect the pattern visually. Um, I would also challenge you. There's a level of subjectivity in how you present this information. If you're advocating to your, let's say, your CEO or uh, your manager, are we trying to celebrate what's working and highlight that? Or do we want to focus on what's underperforming and not working and highlight that? So if I was doing the second scenario, I would make this red and call out these two problematic areas and say, let's focus the next 3 months on improving the website design and the selection of the product. So there's already two different stories out of the simple data set. There's probably the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I always tell the students a data set can be presented 100 different ways in the design elements, in the different charts, in the different takeaway messages. So you have to be intentional about how you create these very slight changes in the design to uh, make a strong impression. So the takeaway is, our eyes work much faster than our brains. When you see this on the right, your eyes start processing the data before your brain consciously analyzes the data. So this is actually a pre-attentive processing. And as a designer, you're taking advantage of these pre-attentive abilities of the vision of human perception. So that's something we have to uh, put into our designs, into the data visualization design process. And I'll explain more as we go in the next few slides. How do we do this? Okay. First is just make the design as clean as possible, remove all the clutter, because the more noise or the more noisy and the more ink you have, like in this to the left, then it gets in the way. It's almost less is more. So the takeaway here is annual growth is declining. Annual growth in healthcare spending has gone down. That's the takeaway. That's the message. Keep it simple. Don't overload your designs. Um, in terms of chart type, what kind of chart should you use? Should you use a bar chart? Should you use a pie chart? I'll challenge you. Can you type into the chart just the letter? Which slice is the second largest? Let's see if you all agree or disagree. If there's any differences in judgment, just visually, there's definitely a right answer, but I will not fault you if I will not be unhappy if you choose a different answer than everyone else. So it seems like B is the winning answer. I think A and D are kind of close to B. But the problem we're struggling is we're using the wrong chart type to do a comparison or ranking of the different values. We should be using instead, if you can type into anyone want to guess what type of chart should we use instead before I show it, I'll give you like 2 seconds. Yes. So much easier, isn't it, for the audience to see that B is indeed the correct answer. Uh, and that's it. That's sometimes a pie chart might not be the best choice, especially the values are very close. It's difficult to gauge the area of a slice of a pie than just the length of a bar chart. So then, if we know this is the fact, how do we generally select the best chart type for our data, for our story? Okay, a bar chart is good, but sometimes it's hard to understand the idea that there's a fraction or proportion. So let's say these people donated money to a foundation or a nonprofit. How do we know this person donated exactly a quarter of all the donations? In this case, a pie chart would be better. So there's different scenarios for presenting the data using different chart types. So choosing the right chart type. There's a few different kind of guidelines or a few different cheat sheets and tips. But generally, I think this one is lays out very clearly. The the ease of how humans perceive and detect the patterns in the data. With a bar chart, it's incredibly easy. Uh, a pie chart is somewhat easy. A line chart is very easy also, but it's best used for change over time. Scatter plot is relationship between two variables. You can also use T maps, tree maps, network graphs, but the more kind of advanced ones, the audience also will struggle. So you have to understand the level of visual skills the audience has. Another framework is just ask the question, what is the best or the worst? Use the bar chart. How has changed over time? Use a line chart. Uh, what stands out? Use the outlier scatter plot. Uh, you can, I'll send the slides, I'll share all the slides with you. So don't worry about reading every single point. So feel free to um, enjoy the slides after the workshop. I'm going to move on quickly to cover everything. In general, there was a research from 1986, almost half a century ago, that the position, whether it's to the left or to the right, or on a scatter plot to the left and above, or to the right below, the position's the most obvious one to detect. The length is the second obvious. The angles, not so easy, as we saw in the slice of the pie. The area also is more difficult to judge the slight differences. And the color is very much impossible to see the intensity, how much value difference it represents. It just gives you a general impression. Okay, let's continue. I'm going to ask you to do another challenge question. So this is a little more challenging. In fact, I am purposely showing not showing you the design, hiding the design. Um, and so to set up introduce this data, um, it shows you what percentage of each of these institutions are female. And on the horizontal axis, it's 0% to 100%. And these are the actual statistical data values. What kind of chart type would you use, and how would you design this chart type? So please type this in. Uh, what chart type would you use, and how would you design it? Like, would it show the absolute values, or would you show maybe not the percentage values? Yes. So you're thinking 100%, and then would you use color maybe to differentiate the two, women versus men, right? So maybe highlight the women. The man is kind of grayed out, so it's in the background. But can you add an annotation or something visual, one visual design element that can get the point across immediately? This is a little more challenging. So as a designer, what design element, what kind of visual cue can you add? Percentage values, that's good. That's a very good suggestion. Because we know in the general population, especially for example among voters, we would expect that to be around the middle, 50%. Would that make sense? It's about 50%. So could we do something somewhere in the chart to emphasize that the expectation is in the middle? It's right in the 50% mark. So what can we add? It's not, it's something you have to add after you choose the chart type. It's a design addition. It's like a layer on top, a threshold. And how would you represent the threshold? What can you do visually? A small pie chart or key to the graph. Good. These are things, yeah, a line, a reference line, or some kind of annotation baseline. So I'll show the result. And now you'll make more sense. You see the line. It's a line that's intentionally added after the fact, after the design is complete. You've done all the right things. You've shown the colors, the percentages, everything, but you need to add this 50% mark to to tell the story. Without the line, the user has to think too much. The audience will maybe get the idea, maybe not get the idea. But if you say, this is the line, they don't have to read the text. They say, why are these not close to the expectation that women should be 50% of the representation, just as voters are? So that's just a design challenge. There's many of these kind of exercises, but the more you practice, the more you see good examples, the more you can utilize and make use of some of these uh, design techniques. Okay, another best practice for design is when you have a line chart and there's too many lines intersecting, I would encourage you to do this instead. We call this design small multiples. So if we go back, each of the lines represent a different type of disease or uh, disease or condition, and it's changed over year how many instances of there are. This is still change over time. You're still showing the same time scale, and you're showing each of the disease. But for each one of these conditions, um, you're graying out the other ones and you're highlighting the one that you care about. So just using highlights makes a huge difference in saying this is what my story is about. So when you're presenting again to the at the hackathon event, you might want to emphasize this is the the case or this is the particular uh, data set and everything else is in the background, fade to gray. So de-emphasize, but still show that back gray in other lines so that you have the comparison as a reference. So highlighting only the ones that you want to tell the story about. Okay. So I've given you some design principles. I hope those will help you guide you, but let's move on quickly to the design process. The design process is actually pretty straightforward. You start with the story. You get the data, you analyze the data, you derive and extract or distill the insights, and then you finally go to the design. And then you have to measure the impact of your visualization. And you test it, you constantly test it. When it comes to storytelling, you understand the context with the subject matter expert. You choose the visual chart type. You eliminate all the clutter the software gives to you. But this fourth step is the key that I want to have you take away with from this workshop. You want to highlight, have strong titles that capture the insight, that maybe inspire some action. And then you tell the story when you present it, just like Hans Rosling did. Okay, so that's the main idea. I'll quickly go through dashboards. Dashboards, you might not have time to create dashboards in this for this exercise, but let's say when it comes to exploring the data, dashboards are a very powerful tool. But the challenge with dashboards is our our brains can process one chart, a single chart, very easily. But when it comes to dashboards like this, if I give you even 5 minutes to look at it, you can't absorb all this information. So typically what the user sees is something like this. Whatever strong visually designed, saturated colors, big numbers, that's what the audience sees. Again, there's too much information. There's a scarcity and constraint in how much attention people can pay to the information. So when you're designing very complex multi-chart dashboards, you have to also keep it simple and less is more. Okay. In terms of the use of color, you want to make it, if the data is sequential, make it the same color but different intensity of the color. If it's different divergent, one side is good, one side is bad, you want to make the middle kind of grayish and then use two different colors. Those are continuous data sets. If it's categorical data, different categories, just use different colors. If you want to highlight something, use contrast and fade to gray. If you want to alert, use a very strong color. So there's a lot more resources about color, which we can go to, but in the slides, you can click through this data wrapper blog, which describes how to best use color. Okay, in terms of decluttering and highlighting, Declutter to focus attention takes discipline and courage. Just like writing, especially now with AI, you want to make the letter. This quote I really like. This philosopher said, "I have only made this letter longer because I have not the time to make it shorter." So you have to edit and you have to, spend at least 20% of the time polishing, adding those design refinements and cues and representations. So the audience only sees shapes and colors. They cannot understand, interpret the data of what's happening in the real world, if there's any gaps or uh, any issues in the data visualization. So is the message obvious and self-evident in the visualization? Make it as easy as possible for them. Um, as there's a case study I want to show you, I'm not sure if I have time. Maybe we'll come back to it if we don't have if we have time after Q&A. So, but this is the case study. So generally to summarize, and I promise you, I'll go a little bit into exploratory data analysis and how visualization fits into it. You start here, what data do I have? So for your hackathon, you're going to collect tons of data and use it. Uh, is this the best data ever? Maybe not, maybe yes. But what do you want to know about your data? So you ask a specific question. And with a specific question, you say, what visualization should I use? Should I use one of these chart types? Okay. And then once you have visualized the data, what do you see and does it make sense? Just this is all internal to your team within your group. You're going to iterate this flow at least tens, maybe many times, and iterate. And then you go back. Do I need to find related data and add to this data set to continue this process? So that's one approach, one process for exploratory data analysis. And many of you have experience in this, so feel free to teach each other and learn from each other. Okay. Okay, so summarizing, what makes a good data visualization is that it has a very high quality data you can rely on, that you can trust. Um, there's a narrative, there's a story behind how you present the data. And you have a communication goal. You have some insights you want to convince and you want to inspire and help convey the meaning and your interpretation of data to create a shared understanding, a shared path forward to approach and solve the problem. And then, of course, you need the aesthetics. But many of this data visualization software already has very nice templates and chart types. So you can use uh, tools like Data Wrapper, Flourish, Tableau, many different visualization tools. And now with AI, you can create infographics using Notebook LM. There's so many tools at your disposal right now. It's a great time to incorporate the intersection of all these four elements makes a very successful visualization. Okay, generally, just a reminder, clearly title the key takeaway, use tons of annotations, link to the data sources so that people can trace back the lineage, the source of the data, uh, timestamp your work, uh, and sign your work. Make sure it's mobile friendly. Make sure it's accessible in terms of colors and the on the phone and so on. Use the colors sparingly, fade to gray, and state the limitations and conclusions if there's any uncertainty. In the real world, once you publish, track how it's being used, who is sharing it in social media, see if it's having an impact or leading to effective interventions. Oops, sorry. And then make sure you continue to update and refresh the data. I teach an entire class on how to automate the data pipeline to make sure the data stays fresh. And we're always updating the data. And then because there's new data, you want to revise your recommendations. So you should anticipate this in your hackathon proposal. You should anticipate things will change in real time. Okay. One of my students is here and he talks about a lot of data analysis. So you can look through his work, a former student of mine. And I have a ton of resources. So you can also go to the slides later. And then in terms of data sources, We have already have a good question, so I'm gonna address the question in a second. I'm like only 1 or 2 slides away from the end, so feel free to type more questions. This is a great time to type in into the chat your any question you like. Okay, some data sources I highly recommend. Our War in Data is a great, very reliable, clean, organized resource. So they have a whole section on India. You just click to the link here. Uh, and then Data Commons is created by Google. It's a nonprofit, and they have a ton of data resources and statistics, and uh, so they basically aggregate lots of data sources. Data Wrapper has a ton of maps, and I highly recommend this too. Just search for the word India in the map. And that's it. So let's go to Q&A. I'll stop sharing so you can see me, but you can also talk into raise your hand and talk into the screen for everyone to hear. So I'm going to read the first question to get us started. Feel free to add more questions. So how to get and portray predictive data without any proper survey means, like if we want to show how something improves from the status quo after our particular recommendation, if we cannot go to the particular place and measure the impact beforehand. Yes, so with data in the future, with anything that's forecasting and there's a level of uncertainty, the first kind of design recommendations always to be transparent and say, this is a projection. This is what we expect to happen. You can also do some sensitivity analysis and say, this is what we expect, but there's a band of confidence, this shaded region, that this could go a little higher or a little lower. And you also want to present how you came up with the model, what kind of input variables you're using to make this prediction. So if you present the model and you build maybe like an interactive dashboard where they can change these parameters or these input variables and see how the outcome will change. This is a much more kind of interactive presentation of your predictive data. Even in Excel, you can just do some changes in some of the input cells, some of the assumptions, and you can see different changes in the sensitivity of the outcomes. Um, and at the end of the day, you want to say this some of the inputs, some of the interventions are under our control. Some of the interventions and variables are difficult to control and be very upfront about it. And some of the interventions or variables we don't know yet. We have to continue learning about the model to make sure the model creates a better, more accurate prediction and it fits the actual empirical data that we will collect in the future. So we'll continue to refine and update our model. And that's more if you have a very a data science on your team, a statistics, someone with statistics background, or someone who has the subject matter expertise. You have to combine all your skills to make make sure you explain what's going into this prediction. Great. And then let's go to the next question. I hope that answers it. Feel free to ask more questions. Feel free to raise your hand. We have about 5 more minutes. So the second question is, how do we decide what data is important enough to be added to a policy book with as there's a page limit? That's actually a very uh, based on each case, case by case type of situation. So it's difficult to uh, make a decision. I I would say the rubric, if you read the rubric carefully, I scanned the rubric, it asks for how will you do the measurements, how will you assess, and how will you provide evidence. There's an expression in the data science field, in management in general, that goes like this from Peter Druckmann that it says, you cannot manage what you don't measure. If you're not measuring it, and you don't know if it's doing better or worse, and so your management decisions cannot be informed by the measurements. So in your uh, in your policy brief, it's important to maybe not show all the exact data points, but to show these are the metrics I will focus on, and I will, hopefully be able to try to disentangle the cause and effect that this metric will lead to this outcome. And we will try our best to uh, to put our efforts into optimizing or maximizing the input variables, the factors that drive a desirable outcome. And lastly, there's um, a principle that I want to share with you. It's called Goodhart's law. And I had a slide about it, but I can't seem to find it. But I can show you that in Goodhart's law, uh, the idea is that, and the challenge you will face as in terms of designing policy is that as soon as you select the metric and set that as a target, it ceases to become a useful, meaningful, effective metric because it's been set as the target. There's many examples of this in the real world. And for when I, in my work experience, if we say, when I was working at YouTube, we want to say, we want to optimize for the number of total views of YouTube videos. Just we want to get as many views as possible. How do you, if that's the target, it becomes very manipulated. The team can say, we will get people to watch as many short videos as possible. And that generates a lot of views. But you're not accounting for whether the videos are high quality, low quality, do the audience want it? How long do the audience watches? What percent of the video, or what's the duration they stay in the video? So there's so many different targets that you want to optimize for and take into account. So you don't want to create these unintended consequences when you build your models and your forecasts and your visualizations. You have to be very thoughtful in your policy brief to say, as soon as I set this target and create the chart to track this high level, let's say the one metric, the one thing that we all want to optimize for, it becomes useless because every member of the team, even the end users, the subjects, and all the stakeholders will optimize for that metric, and it won't tell us anything because there's other possibly more important nuanced metrics that you will neglect to track. So anticipate that, put that into your model, present that, and include that in the visualizations to say, we know that the targets will be cease to be meaningful and useful. And there's a term, I'll send the link in the chat, uh, that's been in the research that I think you should keep in mind. And this is just generally the Wikipedia link, but you can look further into it. It's called Goodhart's law. So that's something you, as policy writers and policymakers, will need to anticipate and incorporate into how you present the data and persuade the judges, the people who will consider your presentation, that you have thought about this, that the targets are easily manipulated, and you want to account for what's truly important to the populations you're serving. So I hope that all helps. And if you have further questions, uh, you know, maybe feel free to go through the organizers, and I'll try to get back to you. But I really enjoyed spending time with you. Thank you for your active engagement in this workshop, and I hope you can make use some of these skills to improve your chances of success in this conference. So have a great time at the India conference, and wish you all best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much, Professor Hong. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll share the recording on the email thread as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to address one last quick question, I'll give a quick answer. Uh, Mohana asks, uh, any tips on making the presentation in 5 minutes? That's a challenge we all have. When it comes to presenting, look at Hans Rosling. Make sure try to, be energetic, be passionate, convey the emotion, make the audience feel the data. So the amount of time you use to set up the context, introduce the story, the data kind of speaks for itself. Don't describe what's in the chart. Don't waste a second trying to say the x-axis, the variable, the change. Just say the key takeaway is this. It's already in the title. It's already in how you use the pre-attentive processing for the audience to visually perceive those patterns and trends. So these skills will help you save a lot of time because you don't have to explain the data because the chart itself is leaves such a strong impression and almost gives away the whole story, reinforces what you introduce in your entire presentation. So it's just a prop. It's kind of like in the movie studio or in the set. It's in the background, and it's you that they want to pay attention to. So that's my advice. Great. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a nice evening or morning. Okay. Bye, everyone.